Welcome to Perspective and Practice. I'm your host, Rachel Sadoff, and today we have with us leader and entrepreneur Tanyella Leta. How are you, Tanyella?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Rachel.
Awesome. Well, I'd love if you could just share or start with, your journey, your leadership journey, because your education as a young person was, you kind of moved to from the UK to Scotland to Jamaica. And those years were really formative in just starting your leadership journey. So I'd love if you'd just share about your journey, starting just at childhood.
Yeah, definitely. I was really fortunate, looking back, I grew up in a very multicultural family. So as you mentioned, have that connection to Jamaica. So my granddad's Black Jamaican and he moved over to the UK as a young man. And he met my grandmother there and they built a family. And so, I grew up in the UK. I grew up actually in Scotland in the Highlands, with my mom was our kind of primary caregiver, and just had an extraordinary upbringing in the sense of the amount of freedom that I was able to have. And my mum is a remarkable woman in and of herself. So I think that was a big part of my journey, was just seeing how she, as a woman of color, navigated, the National Health Service, being a health professional in a system where she was one of the only women of color, and navigating that and really advocating for a very upstream model of health. But yeah, she always advocated for me and always helped me to really follow my dreams and the things that I wanted to do, and also could see really when I needed to be pushed, when I needed to be supported. So she really encouraged me to spend a lot of time in Jamaica as well growing up, which is a big part of, I think, what makes me who I am as well.
Yeah. Did you realize the influence that your mom was having on you, like in those different leadership ways? Like, did you realize how much of a leader influence she was on you as you were a young kid, or did a lot of that come more from like self-reflection as an older person?
Yeah, I think it's much later, right? We're always, you suddenly hear your voice and you're like, oh, that sounds like my mom. But yeah, so it's definitely from later reflection. But I think, it's such a incredible part, I suppose, of being a parent, but also being a leader too, is like, not applying a one size fits all approach to the people around you, but really looking at what they need and what they need to thrive. And no, she could see that kind of at the final year of primary school in Scotland that I was bored. And she made that call to send me, and that manifested, by the way, in basically being angry at her all the time. And so she took the decision to send me to live with my grandparents in Jamaica, where in Jamaica they go to high school a year earlier than in Scotland. So I was actually in high school. And I was really challenged. I mean, I was the only white presenting person in the school, and it was just completely different environment. It was a public school. And so I learned so much. I was pushed academically, but also really, completely different worldview of um, young people for whom education is a huge gift, a massive opportunity, and it reorientated my whole life in a way that I can't, it's hard to even describe, that experience of just being in a completely different setting where the things that I took for granted, like going to school, and I was kind of bored and, playing up or whatever. I suddenly realized, like, wow, okay, this is a gift. I'm lucky to be here. I don't think people might not necessarily know, but Jamaica actually, as a whole, even though there's a great tourist industry, it's quite a poor country. And so, education is a massive gift and an opportunity for those that get the opportunity to have that. So I got to experience that firsthand through friendships with my peers, you know.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. Because not only were you just getting the education there, like you're getting educated in the world, in culture, in life, and
Yeah.
just being in a like being put in a completely different culture as a young person, I think is such a valuable experience.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's huge. And I think a lot of parents notice that for their kids and try to give them experiences that broaden their horizons. And it really, for me, it set me on a course of wanting to learn more about other cultures and other people. And so returning back to Scotland was actually very hard after being in Jamaica. And so it kind of got me thinking a lot, even then looking for other opportunities, knowing that there was more out there for me and more that I wanted to learn. And I was really fortunate again when I was 15. This time it was me, not my mom, but I found a scholarship. My math teacher told me about a scholarship to what's called a United World College. And I actually won that scholarship. And it enabled me to go to school, to high school in Canada with 200 students from 88 different countries. It was literally, if I could have imagined a dream of what I would want next, that was it. And, sometimes I think, I don't know, perhaps some of the people watching are spiritual or have that connection. But as soon as I heard about this school, I knew that I was going. It was that one of those moments. And I have those also throughout my leadership journey where there's a sense of real purpose and certainty. And the outcome is almost like presupposed. Doesn't always look exactly as I imagine, but like I know something's going to happen. And with this school, it was just such a perfect experience for me as a next part of that journey, as you said, of learning about others and in learning about others, learning more about myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, I love when you have those experiences in life where you like are somewhere and you're just like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Like,
Yeah.
this is the next chapter in my life. This is the chapter, especially when it's something that you're like, this is the chapter that's going to cause me to grow and then kind of
Mm,
take those next steps.
yeah.
So it sounds like your grandparents and especially your mom played a huge role in just kind of your education and teaching. And so share a little bit more about the how they played a role in shaping your leadership approach.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I think. I mean, both of my grandparents were teachers, and I didn't really clock on to that until much later. I am in the field of education, and that real love of learning. If I look back, that really certainly originates with them. So that was very powerful, and having that deep domain knowledge of teaching and early learning shaped me a lot in the way that, for example, certain conversations that they would have, the way that they would speak with me. I remember sitting in the car with them and, going around roundabout. We have a lot of roundabouts in the UK. I don't think Americans like roundabouts very much, but we'd go around the roundabout and they would be quizzing me, 6 plus 4, 7 plus 3, 8 plus 2. They knew some of the things that would help me in different domains of academically. And then I think for my mum, it's really, I don't think it was as studied, but she just has an extraordinary energy and presence. And I think that that's something, and I think a lot of people have that, right? But it's really a coming into your own. And that took me a long time to realize that that's something that I've been given also from my mom, my ability to connect with people and to kind of they feel I suppose my like we could talk about authenticity more, but there's an energy there of of your presence, and I don't think that I really grasped that until much later. And in a way I rejected that as a young person, that presence that she had. I felt like she was too much, too assertive, too this, too that, and partly that's social conditioning, right? Of how women are meant to be, and not that many examples of women in leadership, honestly, and what that looks like. And so certainly she fell victim to many of the tropes, I think, of Black women as well, of, being too much, being too loud. And so I internalized some of that also. So it took me a while to really find my voice, own that power, and start to really believe in myself and on that other level.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because you obviously found your voice quickly because you have done so much as a young person and now, just working in nonprofits and then now turning into, a leader in the for-profit world. But I'd love to just kind of take a couple minutes to talk about the nonprofit work that you've done and how, you've learned to lead with integrity and impact. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. Um, Integrity and impact. I mean, I would say it's still a constant, aspiration. You know, when I think of integrity, I think I reflect on that word a lot. It matters a lot to me. I think I've really started to understand that for me, it's about like a wholeness to my leadership. So I want there to be a through line from myself, my core values, and that is aligned all the way through how I feel, how I think, how I speak, how I act, the visions that I have, and then the way in which I communicate those ideas to those around me and how I treat them, and ultimately how I serve others through my leadership. And I think what some of my earlier conditioning was you start with servant leadership, right? You change the world, you want to save the world. And of course so many spiritual leaders have said this, you start with yourself. But for me, that's been the journey of my leadership is like, okay, realizing that in order to have that impact that I want, most importantly on my team and stuff, because that's how you achieve the impact that you have to be fully aligned within yourself. And that's a constant process, for me. I've always been someone that likes to write and journal, and I think you know, that process of integrity is a working out and it's a working through of what integrity means. What does wholeness actually mean? And a constant kind of reflection. I mean, some leaders that I know, they love to go for a run. That's when they clear their mind. Others are great meditators. For me, it's definitely journaling. Yeah, and sometimes it's generally about nothing related to leadership. It's honestly just getting stuff out. But yeah, I find that extremely powerful for me in in bringing that integrity. And I think in terms of the nonprofit work that I've done, I mean, I was I was very fortunate. I hesitate to say lucky because I do think a lot of these things, come together in a way that you don't necessarily realize at the time. There's definitely that element of timing. But also it was in part because I realized very early on that I was a terrible employee,
Me too.
so bad, right? It's like you end up being an entrepreneur just because, yeah, you just can't work for other people. You suck at it.
Yeah.
And so I learned that as an intern my first year out of university. And I was actually interning at an incredible organization that I mentioned to you before called the Campaign for Female Education, CAMFED. But my problem was that, I had to do the role of an intern, but I really wanted to do the role of the CEO. I thought that's where, my ideas should be at. And that's a kind of the audacity to kind of think that way. Meant that it was quite challenging for me to stay there, but I learned so much. And so, in coming to the US then, so I moved with my partner at the time to New York. And I didn't have a work visa at that time. And so I had no opportunity to get a job for anyone else. And so I started to to look about, for what I could do myself. I decided to sign up for the New York Marathon, not being a runner. And that gave me something to talk about, something to be passionate about. And I realized that for me, like that really helped me a lot because having a purpose, having something that I really believed in and believe in still, the power of girls' education, enabled me to connect with others. And I ended up raising, $3,000, which was a lot considering I didn't know anyone in New York and certainly didn't have networks. And I was like, okay, this is, yeah, I love this. I love being able to connect people and bringing them in. And I do think that's a very important part of leadership. Ultimately, we can talk about lots of elements of kind of like social and emotional and other kinds of intelligence. But if you're someone that struggles to draw people into your vision, I think it's hard to be a leader, right? Because ultimately, uh, people have to be able to connect with
Yeah,
you. And I think that's one of the misconceptions around leadership in the nonprofit space. Like people would say to me, oh, I could never lead a nonprofit. I don't like people asking people for money.
yeah,
I was a nonprofit leader for 13 years. I rarely asked people for money.
yeah,
Rarely.
yeah,
What I did was I shared my passion and
yeah,
they felt my authenticity.
yeah,
And that's part of the integrity, right? Because I really believed and still believe that that's my organization that I ran before, global nonprofit focused on literacy. I really believe that NABU is one of the most powerful tools to impact global literacy and the global literacy challenge and the opportunity that we have to do that at scale by giving children access to books in a language they speak and understand. It's
yeah,
their mother tongue. Every child should have that. So
yeah,
people would feel that authenticity, and as they start to unravel that and ask more questions, they start to see more and more of the depth of that authentic love.
yeah,
And of course, then you back it up with, the right business strategy, etc., and the right approach. But yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest misconceptions of leadership in the nonprofit space is that's about asking people for money. But whether you're in nonprofit or for-profit as a leader, you have to be able to articulate, I suppose, what Simon Sinek calls your why.
yeah,
But for me, I think it's really more of like that authentic connection that you
yeah.
have to why you're doing the work you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that you had shared in a prior conversation with me um about your nonprofit that you had really focused on, employing people within that specific culture and having them as native tongue speakers like create the books that you guys created that, in some of the countries that didn't have books for children in that native language and teaching it that way. Can you share a little bit more with us about that and why, as a leader, it was so important for you to do that versus like bringing expats in to lead up some of these initiatives?
Yeah, definitely. So for, us very early on, as we look at the challenge of the fact that children in low-income countries don't have access to books, and
Yeah,
how can you learn to read if you don't have access to books? And then secondarily, they don't have access to books in a language they can read and understand. So what books they do have are often our old donated books, with kids going to swimming pools and, picnics and so that connection there, that intrinsic motivation to learn is very difficult when you don't have the right materials. And so, looking at that problem, we decided as a team, as an organization, that we weren't going to just translate our old out of copyright books in the West into mother tongue languages, but that we wanted to come at the problem working with and co-creating with local artists. And I think this goes back to integrity, right, of the model and just knowing from having lived and worked in these communities, knowing how important that was to the ultimate success and impact. But
yeah,
even if it wasn't about impact, it's much more it's a bit more expensive to do it that way. and perhaps more time consuming. And people would often ask me, "Oh, so you translate books, or why don't you just translate books?" But for us, it was one of those principles of co-creating and co-building. And this, we could talk about this for so long, but it's about breaking in nonprofit because the people who are paying for the service are not the people who are receiving it. There can often be a cycle of dependency, kind of post-colonial mindset. So just by making these small actions as leaders of saying, putting the stake in the ground and saying, no, we're not going to translate books from the West. We want to honor local artists. We want to hear their stories. We want to involve them in the process of the change that we're creating, allow them to lead it, allow them to tell us what stories the children in their community need to learn and partner with them. So we brought a lot of the kind of pedagogy and curriculum of what books, children need. That's a universal, right? Of the number of books children need to learn to read. But the local artists brought such a richness in terms of the stories, the illustrations, the art that would attract children to our platform. And it ended up being, I would say, the secret sauce, the magic of our platform, reaching now 12 million children around the world with books in their mother tongue language. So yeah, I believe that's really important. And similarly, we always hire local people. It comes at every level. If you want to really build and have long-term sustainable impact, these small decisions about how you build, they really matter. Those decisions you make as a leader, they really,
Yeah.
really matter.
It's so important, that leaders, especially leaders that are doing anything globally or, cross-culturally, are really thinking about these things and thinking about how when I involve the community and make them a part of the decisions that are being made and they're influencing how much further that leadership influence goes and how you're no longer spending as much time like fighting resistance as opposed to like bringing together community.
Mm, yeah, exactly. Um, I think that's really important, and I learned that at my first internship where I couldn't handle being an intern at the Campaign for Female Education because the CEO there, Ann Cotton, she's a remarkable social entrepreneur. She's a Skoll award-winning entrepreneur, and she really, you know, took the time to understand the communities where she was working in sub-Saharan Africa and she had some incredible insights. You can read about her, but one of the things that she built into her model at CamFed was this idea of positive cycles of benefit that come from the way that you build. So
Yes.
there's all these positive by-effects from building this way that in
Yes.
a way actually end up mattering more than the girls' scholarships. Like, for example, the female entrepreneurs, the female recipients of scholarships once they graduated high school would then go back into the community. They created a network for them to go back into the community and share and inspire the next generation of girls. And that became what they called the CAMA network. I think it's the biggest Pan-African network of women graduates in Africa. I mean, she didn't set out with that goal to create that, right? But what a ripple effect of decisions of all the way along of listening to the community and building in positive by effect.
Yeah.
I think what I didn't maybe learn early enough was also how important that is at the team level. You know, um, we often talk about the impact out there, but building that at the team level as well is really important. And as a leader, you know, with a strong vision, it was often difficult for me to slow down enough to really take the time to do that. And, I think that's an area that I'm constantly learning and improving is like, okay, how do we build and co-create together? Because that also at the team level has ripple effects across in terms of how quickly you can actually ultimately make the change you want to see.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons, like, I think it's so important for organizations, teams to be continuously doing like retrospectives and thinking, slowing down, kind of like what you were talking about, whether it's running writing, listening to music, whatever you're doing, like slowing yourself down to really reflect and be mindful on things because you never know what's going to come from it. And then bringing it back to a team to then also like have that reflection together can really just develop these like really beautiful things you that individuals or leaders or teams wouldn't have thought or had that idea if they had come from it from an individual mindset. But when we can come to it together, and I think retrospectives sometimes have a negative connotation because we think, oh, we only do it when something went bad. But like also when things are really good, like what did we do well so that we can keep doing more of it? And then keep, just building and creating together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I really learned that, unfortunately the hard way, which is, was through burnout. And I think there's this idea that if we just keep going, keep going, keep going, that is how we're going to be most effective and efficient. And not taking the time to stop, reflect, think about what we're doing, think about maybe not having the structures there that are enabling us to be successful. We just keep going. And realizing actually when I got burnout, I had to reduce from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. And what was remarkable to me is actually I raised more money in those 3 days a week than I had been five days a week. And so that was the lesson to me, when I looked back and I was like, wow, okay, I made this really hard decision. It was hard. I had to cut back. And my one of my team members at the time, who's Rwandan, he said, sometimes you have to take a step back to take a leap forward. That's what
Yes,
we're doing. And he was like, it's okay. We're taking a step back. We're going to take a leap forward. And he was right. We took
yes,
a huge leap forward in our organization because we took the time to stop and reflect and do things more efficiently. And I really think about that now a lot as I'm building again, is like, okay, it's not about just doing, doing, doing. Like, what are we doing? If I don't feel 100% like what I'm doing is right, if it feels, like it's a lot of energy or I'm just not quite sure, or suddenly there's like five projects where there should only be three, it's like stopping and be like, okay, what? Because you only have so much energy and so much intellectual capacity to put to something.
yeah.
Better make sure it's the right thing.
Yeah, it's like the definition of insanity. When you do the
Right.
same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, but when you just stop and take a step back and think and reflect and, you know, even just like watch TV and like give yourself something else to do, was where you can really see that's like for me, my greatest ideas come when I'm like driving or
Mm.
when I'm sitting at a restaurant. I love restaurants that have like the butcher paper and the crayons because that's the restaurant that always like has the most inspiration from me. Is when I'm just like hanging out with a friend, drawing on the table, um, kitty
Yeah,
drawing.
I'm a coffee shop girl. I love
Yeah.
like my Saturday morning, go out and get a coffee and just sit in some really cute little coffee shop and where it's warm and cozy and just don't have devices with me, just have my journal and yeah, what are all the things that are on my mind, the little niggly things that I haven't allowed to rise to the surface of my consciousness, but there's a reason that they're there.
Yes.
And it's so countercultural to, we think just work, 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 work equals more, but
Yeah.
it's not the case. And
Yeah.
it's probably the biggest kept secret. I mean, society encourages us to like burn
Yeah.
the candle at both ends, always be available for everyone. And that's something I don't do anymore.
Yeah, definitely. So, what advice would you give to nonprofit leaders or just leaders in general that are just trying, like, what are some of your biggest lessons that you've learned as a leader? And, if you want to tailor it a little bit to some of the mindset of nonprofit leaders, but I know now that you're doing a lot of for-profit entrepreneur stuff as well. What advice would you give to people?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest piece of advice I could give, be like, don't go it alone. If you are anything, whether you're a nonprofit, for profit, if you are in a leadership position, you probably have some elements of perfectionism. I have my own, I call her my perfectionist dragon. So, your perfectionist dragon, make friends with him or her because, she's got you really far, but also it can be extremely, she can also, burn villages, so it's really thinking about that because in your determination to create the world that you see so clearly, sometimes you can forget that there are other people that want to build and create that with you and are there with you too. And one of the things I've just learned is that actually that process of co-creation, we tried for a while to recoin co-founder as co-creator, but it hasn't really caught on yet. But like that's really what it is because founding is like this flag in the ground kind of thing. But creation, co-creation, yeah, you're creating something, you're changing the world, you're leaving a mark. But it's so much more, I think, beautiful and rewarding to do that with other people. So that what that means practically, like I've learned a lot just in the last year as I've been reflecting on my own leadership about, listening. And sometimes that can look like just not coming first with your ideas, but letting other people speak first. It can look like if someone hasn't spoken, asking them their perspective, taking the time to hear everyone's voice in the room. These things take time, but they start to build a sense of psychological safety, which you can read the literature on that. That there's that balance between psychological safety and accountability. But as leaders, we probably more likely lean to that accountability part. So making sure that there's that psychological safety as well for your team that, they're not going to get burned to the ground if they
Yes.
raise an idea, you know. And so it's making friends with all parts of yourself so that you can bring the right parts to bear at the right time. And yeah, so I've learned a lot about that, really, like co-creating. You're not in it alone. Don't go it alone.
Yes.
Um, Take the time to reach out to people. You may think that they are too busy or they don't have the time, they don't want to hear from you, but that's most often not the case. And, if they don't have time, they're just going to ignore you. But I think that yeah, I didn't do that enough. And so that would be some advice I would give to leaders in any space.
Yes.
We need support.
In another interview that we did, like he's a nonprofit leader as well, and he just talked about compassionate accountability.
Mm,
And I loved that phrase, and it made me think about that as you were kind of talking about, um, the dichotomy of just like creating a safe space, but also holding people accountable, to things, because sometimes there are rules and laws that you have to follow. And
yeah.
sometimes there's places that you can just be creative. And so I just loved that phrase. And I loved as you were talking about being a co-founder or a co-creator. And when you did this motion, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like concrete. This is like, like solid and stuck. Whereas a co-creator is like fluid and
Mm.
um the story is not written yet. And it is to be written in days to come. And so it just gave me this really amazing visual. And I'd never thought about it that way. So I absolutely love that.
I'm glad that resonated. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tanyella, for sharing your journey and your leadership insights. It's been such a pleasure hearing about your experiences and lessons you've learned along the way. And for our viewers, if you've enjoyed this interview with Tanyella and her insights today, don't miss other Break the Norm leadership interviews. And if your organization is interested in learning more about how Break the Norm leadership can help you develop your greatest asset, your people, click the link below. Thanks again, Tanyella.
Thank you so much, Rachel.